This story is titled, My Sister Made My Birthday Party Get Canceled because she asked my mom to go shopping with her that weekend. But when they came back, I had a surprise for them. Hi, everyone. Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and makes sure you never miss out on amazing videos. All right, let's get started. Hey, Reddit. You ever feel like you're not even part of your own family? That's what my 18th birthday felt like. I wasn't the main character in my own life, just an afterthought in a household where my sister Katie and my mom called all the shots. What should have been a big milestone ended up being just another Saturday stuck at home, except this time I was babysitting my little brother Charlie, while everyone else decided my plans didn't matter. A little background to set the scene. My dad passed away 2 years ago. He died in a car accident on his way home from work one evening. Before that, things were stable, I guess. My parents weren't perfect, but they balanced each other out. My dad was the calm, steady one, and my mom was more impulsive, but it worked. After dad died, though, everything shifted. Mom leaned hard into Katie, my younger sister, for emotional support. Or maybe it was the other way around. Either way, Katie became the center of mom's universe, and I was just kind of there. Katie, 15, is the type of person who makes everything about her. She's loud, dramatic, and has this uncanny ability to turn the smallest inconvenience into a life-shattering event. Case in point, 3 days before my birthday, Katie broke up with her boyfriend, Justin. They'd been together for a whopping 4 months, and from the way she was crying, you'd think she'd just been through a divorce. She locked herself in her room, blasted sad music, and refused to talk to anyone except mom. At first, I didn't think much of it. Katie's meltdowns are like bad weather. You learn to wait them out. But by Friday night, things took a turn. Mom decided that Katie needed a distraction, and the best way to provide that, apparently, was to cancel my birthday plans and take her on a weekend getaway to the house in the mountains and to go on a shopping spree afterwards. The house isn't ours. It belongs to mom's friend, who lets her use it whenever she wants. It's where they go when Katie needs to reset. When mom dropped the news, I was furious. I had plans to go out with my friends, and mom was supposed to fund it. Nothing crazy, just dinner and maybe a movie, followed by a little hangout at home with cake. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks, especially since I'd barely done anything for my last birthday. But no, Katie's breakup was apparently more important than my birthday. I tried to push back, reminding mom that it was my birthday, and asking why Katie's drama had to take priority. Her response? Katie's really struggling right now, and you're old enough to understand. We'll celebrate when I get back. That was it. No negotiation, no room for compromise. To make matters worse, she added that I'd need to stay home to watch Charlie, my 6-year-old brother. I tried saying I wanted my birthday to matter for once, but mom wasn't having it. She threatened to cut off my college fund if I didn't do as I was told. So there I was, stuck at home with Charlie while they packed up and left. Now, I love Charlie. He's a sweet kid, and the only person in this house who doesn't treat me like I'm invisible. But he's 6. He needs constant attention. And he has this boundless energy that makes it impossible to relax for even a second. Babysitting him isn't something you just casually tack onto someone's weekend plans, especially not their birthday weekend. By Saturday morning, I was a mix of angry, disappointed, and resigned. Mom and Katie left early, with mom tossing me a quick, "Make sure Charlie eats lunch," as they walked out the door. They didn't even say happy birthday. Not once. I stood in the doorway, holding back tears, watching their car disappear down the street. The day itself was a blur of canceled plans and trying to entertain Charlie. My friends were messaging me, asking what time they should come over, and I had to awkwardly explain that the party was off. Most of them were understanding, but I could tell some were annoyed. I couldn't blame them. They'd rearranged their plans for me, and now I was flaking on them because my family didn't care enough to let me have one day for myself. Charlie, at least, was oblivious to the whole situation. He was thrilled to have me all to himself, and spent the day showing me his latest Lego creations and forcing me to play hide and seek. I tried to make the best of it for his sake, but it was hard to shake the bitterness. Every time my phone buzzed with a birthday message, it felt like a reminder of how much I was missing out on. Around lunchtime, I decided to order pizza as a small treat for myself. It felt pathetic, sitting on the couch with a slice of pepperoni while Charlie watched cartoons, but at least it was something. At one point, Charlie handed me a birthday card he'd made with crayons. It had a drawing of the two of us holding hands, with "Happy Birthday" scrawled across the top in shaky letters. That card was the only bright spot in an otherwise miserable day. By the time Charlie went to bed, I was completely drained. I tried to cheer myself up by watching a movie I'd been wanting to see, but it didn't help. The house felt too quiet, and the weight of everything just sat heavy on my chest. I kept checking my phone, half hoping Mom or Katie would call to wish me a happy birthday, or at least check in. But there was nothing. Not a single word from them. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the day in my head. It wasn't just about the birthday. It was about everything. The years of being overlooked, the constant sacrifices, the way Katie always came first no matter what. I realized I'd spent so much time trying to be the understanding one that I'd let them walk all over me. And for what? They clearly didn't appreciate it. I didn't know what the solution was yet, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not even next week, but someday. I deserved better than this. That was the last thought in my head as I fell asleep, exhausted and emotionally drained from a day that was supposed to be about celebrating me, but ended up being just another reminder of how little I mattered to them. My birthday was a disaster, but the day after was a plot twist I didn't see coming. I was still reeling from everything that had happened, or more accurately, everything that didn't happen. The house was quiet except for the sound of Charlie playing with his toys in the living room. I was trying to keep myself busy cleaning up the mess from the day before when the doorbell rang. Now, our doorbell hardly ever rings unless it's a package delivery or a neighbor asking to borrow something, so I wasn't expecting much. I opened the door, and there he was. Uncle Dave, my dad's younger brother. I almost didn't recognize him at first. It had been a couple of years since I'd seen him, and he looked different, older, a bit grayer around the edges. He was holding a suitcase in one hand and a box of donuts in the other. I just stood there for a second, stunned. Uncle Dave? At my house? Without warning? This was new. Happy belated birthday, kiddo, he said with a grin, handing me the donuts. Thought you could use some company. I didn't even know how to respond. Uncle Dave and I had always gotten along, but he lived a few states away and wasn't exactly the type to pop in for surprise visits. He stepped inside, looking around like he was checking to make sure everything was okay. Before I could ask why he was here, Charlie ran over, squealing with excitement. Uncle Dave scooped him up like he'd been practicing for this moment. After the initial chaos of greetings and hugs, I finally got a chance to ask the big question. So, what brings you here? Uncle Dave gave me a look that was equal parts serious and understanding. I heard about your birthday, he said. Didn't sound like much of a celebration. At that point, I felt my stomach drop. I knew exactly who told him. My Aunt Sharon, Dad's older sister. She's the one family member who still checks in on us from time to time, mostly through text. She'd messaged me the day before, asking how my birthday was going, and I'd given her the watered-down version. Apparently, she didn't buy it. Uncle Dave sat me down in the kitchen, opened the box of donuts, and told me to start talking. At first, I hesitated. What was I supposed to say? That my mom and sister ditched me on my birthday? That I spent the day babysitting instead of celebrating? It felt petty to complain, but he wasn't letting it go. Kid, if you don't tell me, I'll just call Sharon, and you know she'll spill everything anyway, he said, raising an eyebrow. So, I told him. I told him about Katie's meltdown over her breakup, how Mom canceled my birthday plans to take her on a getaway, and how I was left to look after Charlie. I even mentioned how they didn't bother to call or wish me a happy birthday the entire day. Uncle Dave listened quietly, nodding here and there, but mostly just letting me vent. By the time I finished, I was a little surprised at how much I'd said. I guess I'd been holding it in for longer than I realized. Well, that's some grade A BS, he finally said, leaning back in his chair. Pardon my French, but seriously. I couldn't help but laugh a little. Uncle Dave has always been blunt like that, and honestly, it was refreshing. He didn't sugarcoat things or try to make excuses for Mom and Katie. He just called it like he saw it. What's the plan now? He asked. Plan? I repeated, confused. Yeah, the plan. You can't keep letting them treat you like this, he said. So what's your next move? I didn't have an answer. I'd spent so much time just surviving in this family dynamic that the idea of having a plan never crossed my mind. Uncle Dave must have seen the uncertainty on my face because he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Pack a bag, he said. You're coming with me. At first, I thought he was joking. What? I can't just leave? What about Charlie? We'll figure it out, he said, waving off my concern like it was nothing. But you're not staying here. Not after this. It felt too sudden, too drastic. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. What was keeping me here really? Mom and Katie clearly didn't care about me the way they should. And Charlie, while I loved him, wasn't my responsibility. I deserved a chance to focus on myself for once, and Uncle Dave was offering me that chance on a silver platter. Still, it wasn't an easy decision. What if Mom gets mad or tries to stop me? What if she really cut off my college fund? Uncle Dave snorted. Don't worry, I'm here for you. Let her try. I'd like to see her explain to the rest of the family why she's so upset about her kid getting a better shot at life. That made me smile. Uncle Dave had this way of cutting through the noise and getting to the heart of things. He didn't care about drama or appearances. He just wanted what was best for me. I told him I needed a little time to think it over, and he didn't push. Instead, he stayed the rest of the day, hanging out with Charlie and me like it was the most natural thing in the world. By the time evening rolled around, I'd made up my mind. I packed a small bag with the essentials, clothes, my laptop, a few personal items, and got ready to leave. When Mom and Katie came back later that night, they were surprised to see Uncle Dave. And by surprised, I mean completely caught off guard. Mom tried to act polite, but you could tell she was annoyed. Katie barely acknowledged him, still caught up in her post-breakup sulking. Uncle Dave wasted no time. He sat Mom down and laid it all out for her. How I felt, how she'd been treating me, and why I deserved better. I didn't stay for most of the conversation. He told me to wait in the living room with Charlie, but I could hear bits and pieces through the walls. Mom's voice started out defensive, but quickly shifted to something more subdued. By the time Uncle Dave walked out, she didn't say a word to stop me from leaving. Ready? He asked, grabbing my bag. I nodded, and just like that, we were out the door. As we drove away, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, guilt, hope. It was all swirling around in my head. But more than anything, I felt free. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I was finally taking control of my own life. And it was all thanks to Uncle Dave showing up when I needed him most. Moving in with him felt like stepping into an entirely different world. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't some fairy tale where everything magically got better overnight. His house wasn't anything fancy, a small two-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood, but it felt more like home than my actual house ever did. The first thing he did after we arrived was hand me a key and say, "This is your home now. Make yourself comfortable." That hit me harder than I expected. No one had ever said that to me before, at least not in a way that felt so genuine. The first few days were a mix of awkwardness and relief. Uncle Dave had a pretty simple routine. He worked weekdays at an auto repair shop he co-owned with a friend and spent his evenings unwinding with TV or tinkering on old car projects in the garage. He wasn't one to hover or smother me with questions, which I appreciated. Instead, he gave me space to settle in and figure things out for myself. One of the first things I noticed about living with him was how quiet everything felt. Back at home, it was always chaos. Katie screaming about one thing or another, Mom rushing around trying to keep up with her demands, Charlie needing attention every 5 seconds. Here, the loudest thing was the sound of the clock ticking in the kitchen. It was weird at first, but also kind of nice. Uncle Dave had a way of making the little things feel special. The day after I moved in, he took me grocery shopping and told me to grab anything I liked. When I hesitated, saying I didn't want to go overboard, he just shrugged and said, "You're not a guest, kid. Stock up." It was such a small gesture, but it meant a lot. Back at home, Mom was always so tight with money when it came to me. Yet somehow Katie always got whatever she wanted. Knowing I didn't have to fight for scraps anymore was a relief I didn't realize I needed. The biggest adjustment was school. I was in my senior year, so transferring this late wasn't ideal, but Uncle Dave insisted it would be worth it. He even went with me to the school office to get everything sorted out. Watching him interact with the staff was eye-opening. He was firm but polite, making sure I got all the help I needed without coming off as pushy. It made me realize how much I'd been missing that kind of support in my life. My first day at the new school was nerve-wracking. I didn't know anyone, and walking into a building full of strangers made me feel like I had a neon sign over my head that said, "New Girl." But the school had a surprisingly chill vibe, and by the end of the week, I'd managed to make a few friends. Nothing too close yet, but enough to feel like I wasn't completely alone. Uncle Dave was always checking in, but in a way that didn't feel suffocating. He'd ask how school was going or if I needed anything, but he never pried too much. One night, I came home from a long day and found him in the garage, working on some old motorcycle that looked like it hadn't run in decades. "Rough day?" he asked without looking up. "Not rough, just a lot," I said, leaning against the doorframe. He nodded, still focused on the bike. "Yeah, moving to a new place is never easy, but you'll get the hang of it. You're tougher than you think." That stuck with me. I'd never thought of myself as tough, but hearing him say it made me feel like maybe I could handle more than I gave myself credit for. One weekend, Uncle Dave surprised me with a day trip to a nearby hiking trail. I'm not exactly an outdoorsy person, but he insisted it would be fun. We packed some sandwiches and drove out to the trailhead early in the morning. It was a pretty easy hike, and the view at the top was incredible. I remember sitting on a rock, looking out at the trees and mountains, and thinking, this is what peace feels like. On the way back, we stopped at this tiny diner for lunch. It was one of those places where the waitress knows everyone by name, and the menu hasn't changed in decades. Uncle Dave ordered a massive stack of pancakes, and when I gave him a look, he just said, "What? Pancakes aren't just for breakfast." That was the thing about him. He had this way of making everything feel light and easy, even when things were heavy. He didn't lecture me or try to fix all my problems. He just let me be myself, which was exactly what I needed. As the weeks went by, I started to feel more like myself again. I wasn't constantly stressed. I could actually breathe. I even started doing better in school, which was a shock to me, and probably would have been to my teachers back at my old school too. Uncle Dave noticed and made a point to acknowledge it. "See? Told you you're tougher than you think," he said one night when I showed him a paper I got an A on. There were still hard days, of course. I missed Charlie a lot, and there were moments when I felt guilty for leaving him behind. But every time I started to doubt my decision, I'd remind myself why I left in the first place. I deserved a chance to focus on myself, and I couldn't do that in a house where I was always second place. One night, as we were watching some old action movie on TV, Uncle Dave turned to me and said, "You know, your dad would be proud of you." That caught me off guard. I didn't talk about my dad much, partly because it still hurt, and partly because I didn't want to seem like I was fishing for sympathy. But hearing Uncle Dave say that meant more to me than I could put into words. "Thanks," I mumbled, not trusting myself to say much more without getting emotional. "Don't thank me," he said. "You're the one doing the work. I'm just here to make sure you've got the space to do it." And that's exactly what he did. It was a regular Tuesday night when I got the email. I was sitting at Uncle Dave's kitchen table, finishing up some homework, when my phone buzzed. The subject line read, "I owe you an apology." I didn't even have to check who it was from. Mom. I stared at the screen for a while, debating whether to open it. It had been months since I'd left, and in that time, I hadn't heard much from her or Katie. Honestly, I hadn't really expected to. Mom wasn't exactly the type to admit she was wrong, and I figured she'd decided to just let me go quietly. But here it was, an apology. Or at least, I hoped it was. When I finally opened it, the message was long, like essay length. She started by acknowledging that she'd been unfair to me and admitting that my leaving had forced her to reflect on how she'd treated me. She wrote that she'd been carrying guilt ever since Uncle Dave showed up and called her out. She admitted she'd been too focused on Katie, too quick to push me aside, and too blind to see how it affected me. At first, it all sounded good, almost too good to be true. But as I kept reading, the tone shifted. She started talking about how hard things had been for her since Dad died, how overwhelmed she'd felt trying to raise 3 kids on her own, and how she'd relied on Katie because she understood her better. It felt like she was justifying everything, even if she didn't mean it that way. Then she dropped the real bomb. She admitted that her resentment toward me didn't just come from stress or grief. It went deeper than that. She wrote, "There's something I never told you, but I think you deserve to know now. When I was pregnant with you, your father had an affair." I had to read that line 3 times before it fully sank in. My dad, my rock, my hero, had cheated on her while she was pregnant with me? It felt like someone had pulled the rug out from under me. She went on to explain that while she'd forgiven Dad eventually, she'd never truly let go of the anger, and somehow, that anger had been redirected at me. She said she didn't even realize it at first, but every time she looked at me, she was reminded of that time in her life, of the betrayal, the arguments, the humiliation. She admitted that it wasn't fair, and that it wasn't my fault. She said she hated herself for treating me differently, but by the time she realized how much damage she'd done, she didn't know how to fix it. The email ended with her asking for a second chance, saying she wanted to rebuild our relationship. She didn't want to lose me forever. I didn't know how to feel. I was angry, sure, but there was also this weird sense of relief. For years, I'd been trying to figure out why she treated me the way she did, why I was always second place, no matter what I did. And now I finally had an answer. It didn't make it okay, but at least it made sense. I read the email a few more times that night, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to respond right away, to tell her exactly how much she'd hurt me. But another part of me didn't want to give her the satisfaction of a reply. After everything I'd been through, did she really deserve a second chance? Or was this just another way for her to ease her own guilt? I ended up calling Uncle Dave. I hadn't told him about the email yet, but I figured he'd have some good advice. When I explained everything, he was quiet for a moment before saying, "Look, kid, it's up to you whether you want to open that door. But just remember, an apology doesn't erase what happened. It's okay to take your time." That stuck with me. I didn't have to rush into anything. I could process this on my own terms, without feeling pressured to forgive her just because she said sorry. So that's what I did. I took my time. In the end, I decided not to respond. Not yet, anyway. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and I didn't want to open up a conversation that I wasn't prepared to have. I needed more time to figure out what I wanted, not just for myself, but for our relationship moving forward. Uncle Dave was supportive of my decision. He reminded me that it was okay to prioritize my own healing, even if it meant keeping my distance. "She's the one who made those choices," he said. "Now she has to live with the consequences. You don't owe her anything." That was the thing I needed to hear most. For so long, I'd felt like I had to be the bigger person, like it was my responsibility to keep the peace. But it wasn't. Mom had made her choices, and now it was my turn to make mine. In the months that followed, I started to feel more at peace. I was doing better in school, making new friends, and even picking up old hobbies like painting again. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally living for myself instead of trying to meet someone else's expectations. As for Mom, I didn't hear from her again after that email. I'm not sure if she gave up or if she was waiting for me to make the next move, but either way, the silence was kind of nice, and it reassured me that if she cared enough to make things right, she would have tried harder. I think her email was a turning point, not just for her, but for me too. It forced me to confront a lot of things I'd been avoiding, and while it didn't fix everything, it helped me start to let go of some of the anger I'd been holding on to for so long. Do I forgive her? Not yet. Maybe not ever. But at least now I know the truth. And for now, that's enough. Meanwhile, life with Uncle Dave had become my new normal, and for the first time in a long time, things felt steady. Being around him made me feel grounded. We had this unspoken understanding. It just worked. That's why the day everything changed felt like a punch to the chest I wasn't ready for. It was a Friday afternoon. School had let out early, and I'd stopped by a local bakery on my way home. Uncle Dave had a weakness for chocolate chip cookies, and I thought it'd be nice to grab some for our usual Friday movie night. It was such a small thing, but it felt good to do something thoughtful for him, since he was always doing things for me. When I got home, the house was quiet. I figured he was still at the shop, finishing up for the day. It wasn't unusual for him to stay late to help with a tricky repair or catch up on paperwork. I sent him a quick text. "Got cookies for tonight. Don't work too hard." Then I flopped onto the couch and turned on the TV to kill some time. Hours passed, and I started to wonder why he hadn't texted back. It wasn't like him to leave me on red. By 8 p.m., I started getting this uneasy feeling in my stomach. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. That wasn't like him either. He always kept his phone charged, especially in case I needed something. I told myself he was probably just caught up at work, maybe helping out a customer who came in late. But the worry wouldn't go away. At 9:30, the doorbell rang, and for a split second, I thought it was him. Maybe he'd forgotten his keys or was carrying something too heavy to open the door. But when I opened it, my heart sank. Two police officers were standing there, their expressions grim. "Are you related to David?" one of them asked. "He's my uncle," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry to inform you that he passed away earlier today. There was a medical emergency at his workplace, a heart attack. Paramedics responded, but unfortunately, he didn't make it." I didn't hear much after that. The words, "he didn't make it," just kept looping in my head, over and over. I remember nodding mechanically as they handed me some paperwork and offered their condolences. When they left, I closed the door and just stood there in the silence, trying to process what had just happened. Uncle Dave was gone. The man who had given me a home, who had become my safe place when I felt like I had nowhere else to go, was just gone. The next few days were a haze. Calls had to be made, arrangements had to be figured out, and I felt completely overwhelmed. I didn't even know where to start. Uncle Dave didn't have kids or a spouse, so everything fell on me. I didn't feel ready to handle it all, but thankfully, his best friend and business partner, Mike, stepped in to help. Mike was a solid guy. No nonsense, but with a good heart, and he made sure I didn't have to go through it alone. We spent hours at the funeral home, figuring out details like flowers and a service date. Every decision felt like a monumental task because I wanted to make sure it was something Uncle Dave would have been okay with. The funeral was small but meaningful. People from all corners of Uncle Dave's life showed up. Friends, neighbors, co-workers. They shared stories about how he'd helped them in ways big and small, from fixing a broken furnace in the dead of winter to helping a struggling single mom with car repairs free of charge. He was the kind of guy who didn't just talk about being there for people, he actually showed up. Mom and Katie came to the funeral, though I wasn't sure why. They didn't seem particularly moved, and their presence felt more like an obligation than genuine grief. Mom gave me a stiff hug after the service and said, "If you need anything, just let me know." But it felt hollow. Katie barely spoke to me at all, which, honestly, I was fine with. They didn't stay long, and when they left, it felt like a weight had been lifted. A few weeks later, I got a call from his lawyer. Uncle Dave had left me everything in his will: his house, his savings, and even his share of the repair shop. I was stunned. I'd known he cared about me, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. He hadn't just given me a home, he'd given me a future. It was overwhelming, to say the least. I was 18, still figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, and now I was responsible for managing an estate. Mike offered to buy out Uncle Dave's share of the shop, which was a relief. I trusted him to take care of it, and the sale gave me a financial cushion I never expected to have. Keeping the house was an easy decision. It was more than just a place to live. It was a piece of Uncle Dave. I couldn't imagine selling it, at least not yet. Living there alone felt strange at first, but over time I started to feel like he was still with me, in a way. His presence was in the little things: the tools in the garage, the old leather jacket hanging in the closet, the way the floorboards creaked in just the right spots. Uncle Dave may have been gone, but everything he'd done for me, every lesson, every kind word, every moment of quiet support, stayed with me. He had believed in me when no one else did, and now it was up to me to carry that forward. It had been a couple of months since Uncle Dave's funeral, and life was finally starting to feel somewhat stable again. Then, out of nowhere, my mom called me. I stared at the screen for a solid minute before deciding to pick up. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral, and to be honest, I didn't really expect to. Our relationship wasn't exactly warm, and after years of feeling like an afterthought, I didn't have much energy left to try and fix it. Still, I picked up. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound neutral. "Hi, sweetie," she said, her voice overly sweet, like she was trying too hard. "How are you?" It was such a weird question coming from her. How was I? Did she really want to know, or was she just trying to make small talk? I told her I was fine and asked why she was calling. She hesitated for a moment before launching into what I could tell was a rehearsed speech. "Well, things have been a little tight around here," she started. "Katie is struggling with school, and Charlie's growing so fast he needs new clothes every other week. And, well, you know how expensive everything is these days." I didn't respond right away. I could feel where this was heading, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was just venting, but then she hit me with it. "I was wondering," she said, her tone shifting to something more hesitant, "if you could help out a little. I know Dave left you everything, and I'm so glad he looked out for you, but we could really use some support right now." There it was. She wasn't calling to check on me. She wasn't calling to rebuild our relationship. She was calling for money. "I don't think I can do that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Uncle Dave left that money for me to build a future, not to fix everyone else's problems." Her tone shifted immediately. "I'm not asking for a lot," she said, her voice edging toward frustration. "Just a little to help us get through. You don't know how hard it's been, trying to keep everything together on my own." I wanted to laugh. On her own? She hadn't been on her own since Dad died. Katie was her constant companion, and she'd always put her needs above everyone else's. And as for Charlie, I'd been the one taking care of him most of the time before I left. If anyone had been left to fend for themselves, it was me. "I get that things are hard," I said carefully, "but that doesn't mean it's my responsibility to fix it. I've worked hard to get where I am, and Uncle Dave wanted me to have a chance at something better. I'm not going to give that up." She didn't take it well. "You're being selfish," she snapped. "Family is supposed to help each other. I can't believe you just turn your back on us like this." That hit a nerve. "Selfish?" I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "I've spent my whole life being the one who's overlooked. I was the babysitter, the quiet one, the kid who didn't matter as much as Katie. And now that I finally have something of my own, you want to take that from me too?" "Number, I'm done." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, probably trying to figure out how to respond. Finally, she sighed. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said, her tone colder now. "I just thought you'd want to help your family." And just like that, the conversation was over. She didn't even try to understand where I was coming from. It was all about what she wanted, as usual. I hung up feeling drained, but also a little proud of myself. For once, I hadn't backed down. I'd stood up for myself, and it felt good. A few days later, she texted me, apologizing for the way she'd spoken to me, but still asking if I'd reconsider. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. If she couldn't see why this was important to me, then no amount of explaining would change her mind. After that, I decided to cut contact for a while. I blocked her number and stopped checking for messages. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. I couldn't keep letting her guilt me into doing things that weren't right for me. Uncle Dave had believed in me enough to leave me his legacy, and I wasn't going to let her or anyone else take that away. The whole situation made me think a lot about what family really means. For so long, I'd believed that family was about obligation, that no matter what, you had to stick together and help each other out. But Uncle Dave showed me a different kind of family. He chose to support me, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That's the kind of family I want in my life. People who choose to be there for each other, not because of guilt or obligation, but because they genuinely care. Looking back, I think that phone call was the final straw. It was the moment I realized I couldn't keep holding on to the hope that Mom would change. She'd made her choices, and I had to make mine. It hurt, but it also felt freeing. I was finally taking control of my own life, and for the first time, I wasn't looking back.